All right, I'm going to assume that this is recording right now. This Zoom stuff. It seems to be the way we are headed these times and days. So if we're recording, welcome. My name is Dr. Daniel White Hodge. I am a professor of communication arts out here in Chicago. I host a podcast called Profane Faith, and welcome to my little home studio. This is actually what I call the lab down here in my basement where I do all my recordings. And this last spring, when we had to go all online, I was able to record down here and record all my lectures and interact with students and all that good stuff. So you are here bearing witness to this. And so a couple different things before we get going here. I wanted to take on something that when I was asked to do this, I started thinking about a variety of different topics, but I really wanted to hone in on something that I've been trying to process and think through easily for the last 5 years, and especially since the 2016 election. And this has been something that has been on my mind, on my heart, and so I wanted to engage with this, and I wanted to nuance it a bit, and particularly with how we understand life, how we understand race, how we understand gender, how we understand just where we're at right now. And so for me, it's looking towards a theology of hopelessness. I'm not drawing this right out of the air. This comes out from a friend of mine and pseudo mentor, Dr. Miguel de la Torre, and his work, Embracing Hopelessness. This is a great read. If you haven't had a chance to read it, I highly recommend it. And so I wanted to kind of break down, what do I even mean by hopelessness? Because I think for a long time we've been told to hope that this is going to come, and essentially we've been taught that everything is going to work out just fine. And I want to reject that notion. I want to reject that and assert that actually comes from a dominant culture's perspective, a dominant society's perspective. And so this is not relevant for those of us who have lived under the boot and the heel of oppression for hundreds of years. And so things don't always work out. The fact that we're still talking about the firsts being anywhere hasn't necessarily meant we've gone much further than what we made progress in 1964. If anything, we have regressed with the current administration in our understanding of civil rights, social equity, and really the rights for all, and how those things break down. So what do I mean by this? Well, a couple of different things. I want to look at hopelessness as a process. In other words, how we engage and how we do things in life, this process. And I want to kind of push us a little bit, because I get that this is difficult. I get that some of you watching right now were probably thinking, man, I've been always taught that things work out. I'm imagining if you go to church, you've probably seen praise and worship songs that things work out in the end, and that our God is a mighty God, right? It is a very interesting dichotomy when we start to engage and work through some of those areas of understanding, and particularly how we look at God, because no one wants a punk God, right? No one wants a punk ass God. You don't want to be able to kick God's ass, okay? You want a God that is almighty, that can shoot lightning out of his ass and lasers out of his eyes and thunderbolts and lasers out of his fingers, right? That's the kind of God that we've been taught to look at. And so I would take that and say, let's put that on the table for a second, because at the end of the day, this is still a very Eurocentric way of looking at God. So hopelessness as a process. Hopelessness as a starting point. Miguel de la Torre writes, he says, in the proper order of things, his book explores what it means to move away from a middle-class, privileged theology, which again assumes all things are going to work out in the end. All things, in spite of Romans 8:28, do not always work for good or for those called by God's purposes. And I want to emphasize that, because this is the starting point to begin to understand where we find ourselves, particularly persons of color, Black people in particular, in this society and in this country, right? As Black people, we are a people with no home, no theological home, and no physical home, no spiritual home, right? Yes, you can do a DNA test. Yes, you can do your ancestry and everything. But at the end of the day, Blacks in the United States don't have a country that they can go to. Okay. So this hopelessness is a starting point, this point in where we begin to understand God from a hopeless position, not from a position of power, not from a position of understanding that, again, somehow, some way, right? Hope always wins. Because you have to remember something. As a communication theorist, we begin to look at rhetoric and how rhetoric just get dismantled in society, particularly how media creates narratives and how these assumed narratives are there. We tend to have these narratives that focus around hope. Hope is a social construct. And I like what President White had to Snow, or was it Snow? Snow, right, on the Hunger Games, who actually talked about how hope um, is a weapon and it can be weaponized and whatnot. Because if you hope that things will eventually work out, you'll put in those 18-hour days. You'll go to school and get into debt. You'll go over and do all these things in hope that things will be working out. But as the scholar and prophet Tupac Amaru Shakur said, people have been in college for a long time already. Right. We've been had colleges. We've been had those things. And there are still Brendas. There are still Trayvon Martins. There are still George Floyds, right, that we are dealing with. And so this becomes a starting point where we begin to embrace this notion of hopelessness. Hopelessness as being. I know most of us have been taught that we have to keep our heads up, and even so much to the point that we have a toxicity of hope and positivity, right? Always be happy. Always think that things are going to work out. And the reality of it is that is all just bull crap. It really isn't a thing to do because no one really gets up in the morning and begins to just say, okay, today is going to be positive, because we are humans. We live in ups and downs and ups and downs. That is the normal way of life. There is no one on this earth who can say I'm happy and positive all the time. And if they do, they're lying to you. They're hiding something. People who are happy all the time scare the hell out of me. And so I want to be able to actually see somebody who has highs and lows. I like seeing people at their worst day. I like seeing people on their best day and everything in between. So hopelessness begins as this being, as this way of understanding life from this starting position. And again, this is part of what Dr. De La Torre is trying to break down in understanding this. And it's also a way of decolonizing our understanding of what Christianity is. For so long, Christianity, which is why I reject evangelicalism, and I reject the notion that all we have to do is get people saved. Because for so long, that is what Christianity has been. Just get people saved. I used to be a member or on staff with Young Life many moons ago. And that was the sole goal. Let's get them to camp. Let's get them to say so. Let's get them to confess the name of Jesus Christ as their Savior. If we can do that, we have accomplished everything. And at the end of the day, I'm just going to call it out. That's bullshit. That's a great, I don't even say if it's a great starting point. I'd say that's okay. But the reality of it is that those kids that I was working with, right? Not the suburban kids that go home to mom and dad with 4 or 5 different cars, a summer home, a vacation, right? Their vacation was down the street, uptown, grandma's house, right? That was their vacation, or just going to camp. So one of the things that we failed at as a leadership team, because we had embraced a white colonized understanding of Christianity, was that we thought, hey, once they accept Jesus, that's it. Their life should work out. Well, guess what? When they come down off that mountain, off of camp, and they go right back into hell, hell starts right back over again. So hopelessness is process. Hopelessness is a starting point, and hopelessness as being. All right? Stick with me now. Come on, y'all. So what are we talking about here? What are some of these foundations? Well, things are really messed up right now. And I don't know where y'all stand with, strong language. I don't even consider it cursing, but I want to be weary because I get that some people get turned off. And just by looking at a bald black man here, speaking very vigorously can probably set people off, right? But things are messed up right now. If you don't understand that, then you've got a lot more understanding to do. And this is probably not the lecture you should be listening to. Okay. We live in a time where we have the president of the United States conspiring with other conspiracy theorists throughout the country to say that COVID-19 is somehow a conspiracy theory, right? That somehow there is a deep state that is trying to take him out. We live at a time when we can almost to the point that we can begin to say, well, blacks were better off when they were under the care of white folks. Right? I think we should bring some of that stuff back. We live at that time where white nationalists can storm a U.S. Capitol fully armed, no question about it, and they can walk away and celebrate that day. But when we celebrate things as black people and just to say, hey, we just want to stand up and be alive, we get maced, we get tear gassed, then we get blamed for being unpeaceful. Right? And the old notion, of course, of nonviolence is, of course, a white construct as well, because this nation has always been violent and used violence when it wants to use violence. Right? Nobody was talking about all lives matter when bin Laden was accused of bombing the 9/11, accused of set up for putting together the 9/11 attacks. Nobody was talking about, oh no, all lives matter. They were wanting blood. We wanted an enemy. Things are messed up right now, y'all. Evangelicalism has failed us. I encourage as many, especially people of color and especially black folk, we need to move away from evangelicalism. It has failed us miserably, and it has pushed those who thought things were going to work out into desolate fear, depression, and to the angst of it, suicide. And so we live in this time. We live in this time where that is not the idea of just getting saved, just going to church. That shit don't work no more. And what we need is a theology of the nitty gritty, to quote Anthony Penn and what in his framework for nitty gritty hermeneutics, a theology that actually pushes beyond just praying about it or lifting your hands or going to church. Those are the ways of the old, and we have to begin to look at what's the new. And I would actually posit that we have to begin to look at God as what the physicist and Soviet astronomer Nikolai Kardashev proposes, the types of civilizations that are out there in the universe. And God is a type 3 civilization. A type 1 civilization can manage the entire energy and material resources of a planet. A type 2 civilization is capable of harnessing the energy and material resources of a star and its planetary system. And a type 3 civilization, well, they're able to manage the energy and material resources of an entire galaxy. So if you have that kind of technology beholden to you, you can imagine being able to create a life and manage it is probably just, like nothing else. Like, yeah, we'll just go create some more humans or some whatever, right? So Kardashev proposed that a civilization's level of technological advancement could be measured and based on the amount of energy that the civilization is able to utilize, and therefore establishing 3 types of civilizations. If you're up on astronomy talk today, they're actually proposing type 4 civilizations that are able to control multiple galaxies. And I would look at God upon as that, as a type 3 civilization that helps establish life on this planet. But the notion that God is going to somehow, take care of us and take care of those that they care for, I mean, it's no more than saying COVID-19 is not welcome here and putting up signs all over the place. That's cool. That's great. Of course it's not welcome here, but that don't make a difference to COVID-19. It's still coming. All right. As you can put up all the signs you want. All right. I'm pretty sure George Floyd went to church and prayed those prayers that things are going to work out. God will protect me. Where is God in those situations? See? So this is, again, this hopelessness as being, right? This hopelessness as a starting point, and realizing that God is, again, an alien civilization with technology far beyond us, and to which technology to us looks like magic. Let's keep moving on. My time is nigh. These are just some changes that are happening in our country today. Most of y'all know this. This is nothing new. We have generational shifts, and we have a downturn in particularly white Protestants. The right knows that, particularly Trump's team knows that, and it's created all kind of lies around the idea of socialism and the idea of Black Lives Matter and the idea notion that, Antifa is going to take over and create a demigod. And so this is a scare for a lot of people because the country is changing, not necessarily in power, not necessarily in civic, systemic leadership, but in demographics. Okay, we know this. These are just some trends. The decline of white Christians, 2006 to 2016, right? We know that. We know that in 2007 there were more, right? And then by 2016 there were less than 14%, especially around the Bible Belt. And we also know by the research that a lot of these folks who consider them Christians and consider themselves younger, or who are younger, tend to lean left or be a lot more tolerant of things that would used to be hot button issues like abortion, right? So there are some changes, some multitude of changes happening in this country. And I think it's important for us to actually begin to see some of these things, but also know that these changes don't mean that systemic racism has ended. I get so tired of people trying to tell me that, oh my gosh, look, we have all these people of color here and they're great and they're nice, right? And just all that to say that racism is over. No, it ain't over. And we're having a reckoning right now. Today is the day that the Redskins announced, the Washington Redskins, right? They announced that they are getting rid of that logo and they're getting rid of that name, that racist name. Can you imagine, right, a football team called the American Niggers? Or not even niggers, niggers, right? With the ER. And a white person defending that stuff, being like, hey, it's historical. We've always had this, right? A large part of why that's happening is because there is a push, right, from folks who are saying, I'm tired of this mess. And the reckoning is now. It's now time. Kaepernick started something much bigger than I think even he realized. Theology of hopelessness, y'all. So racial attitudes, I believe, in the 2016 election, this is what helped, particularly what got your boy 45 elected. There's fear of a new U.S. electorate, right? We know that. We know with all the voter suppression going on, we have an election coming up here in November. It's going to be probably one of, at least for me in my lifetime, one of the greatest elections that I will see because of all the madness, because we tend to believe what we see in the media. There's fear of immigration, right? There's this knowing that if they come over here, they're going to gain access and they're going to demand these things, right? Taxes in the economy, because that is the religion that we all bow down to, is money, right? And then there's main evangelical tropes, abortion, same-gender marriage, LGBTQ bathrooms, right? We haven't heard the bathroom piece for a while, but it's coming back. It'll circle back. It always does, right? And those become the center points, if you will, the pickups for a lot of folks who, want to hop on those bandwagons without ever reading deeper into the issues. For example, abortion has little to do about life. It's much more about racism. Go check out what my good friend and colleague, oh man, I'm spacing on her name, and I can see her right in front of me. She was on my podcast. I should know this, but she talks about she talks a lot about the history of abortion and how it was created, and it really wasn't even on the rights teleprompter until the 80s, right? And really, Lisa Sharon Harper. That's who you should go look at because she has a whole manifest on how that breaks down. Then, of course, you have evangelical support of Trump, 81.8%. And I don't necessarily believe that number has really changed. I don't really believe polls that their polls are showing that, oh, Trump is down. They were saying that mess in 2016, right? There's also a perception of whites losing the majority, which scares the hell out of white people, most white people. And that's not just in politics. That's in churches. That's in nonprofit organizations. That's in all them damn short-term missions people want to take pictures, with the black and Mexican kids, right? And this notion of returning to American values. That's just a complete hoax in and of itself, right? There's also a rise in hate for blacks and the feelings that blacks, they don't have too many privileges. They can go to college, they're doctors, they're lawyers. White lives matters, right? There's some, when you begin to understand the alt-right and what the particularly what neo-Nazis are saying, they're saying that, white voices are being erased and that white cis males, white Christian, particularly Christian cis males, are no longer wanted and that they're considered the enemy. So I think it's important to begin to kind of look at some of those as well, because again, Theology of hopelessness. Let's keep moving. I love Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas. She has a great book on Stand Your Ground. This is what she writes about manifest destiny and stand your ground. She says, today, the manifest destiny of stand your ground culture war is fueled by the presence of a black man living in the White House. There's no greater challenge to America's grand narrative of Anglo-Saxon exceptionalism than a black president. This represents a complete encroachment upon the space reserved for cherished white property. It is no surprise, therefore, that stand your ground culture has asserted itself in an aggressive and unrelenting manner. Think about the uprisings, and notice that I call them uprisings and not riots that happened, okay? That happened in Minneapolis, and really a lot of the cities. I'm here in Chicago. They happened 2 blocks away from where I live, right? What was the biggest thing that came from that? Tear downs of white-owned property. And I get that people are got bumper stickers now that say Black Lives Matter. When I see systemic change, I may get on board with that crap. Until then, it's just a propaganda note that some white people think it's cool to now go and do, right? And this is what Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas is after right here, and looking at that and breaking those things down. Another great read if you hadn't had a chance to read it. So how do we move forward in all of this crap, man? I tell you, it's not easy. It's not easy. And I don't claim to sit here and say, oh, you do these 5 things and then we'll be better. No. I think we have a lot of reckoning to do. And hopefully, but I don't have a lot of hope for it, that we'll make it out of this without a civil war. But maybe we need a civil war. Maybe we need shit to just be burnt down. Because I think we have to move beyond good intentions. I didn't mean it that way. That's not what we were trying to do. Right, but that was the impact of it. For example, if you're still part of a church organization, do they still do short-term missions to go out and help the poor little people? What's that all about? Beyond good intentions. I think it's also about engaging and dismantling the great white hope worldview, that somehow white people are the saviors for everything. Right? The notion when people say, well, what about, does Black Lives Matter even speak to the black on black death? Man, shut your silly ass up and talking about mess like that. Because the reality of it is that black people, people of color have been in those neighborhoods for decades. Right? But people don't see that mess. And they think, well, white people aren't there. Nah. And of course we got to embrace the multi-ethnic Jesus. There weren't no white people in the Bible. Jesus wasn't white. And if race wasn't such a big thing for Christianity, why does Jesus continually show up as white? And God with white, with a big ass beard and, flowing white hair and crap, man. Tired of that. That goes right back into number 4, deconstructing a neo-colonized Christian ideology, which for me is dismantling evangelicalism and dismantling what that means, particularly for oppression, particularly for nonprofit organizations, and what that means. Moving forward in the hopelessness, y'all. And then number 5, I think we have to prepare for shit. I think we have to develop curriculum with that in mind. Mother Teresa gives us a great example of this theology around hopelessness. I think when people asked her, why do you sit around with people who are dying, they're dead, their ticket is punched? And she was like, I know, I get that. But nobody just gets to die alone. Nobody should have to die alone. There it is. Beyond good intentions, right? Developing the shit curriculum, right? In other words, preparing for that. Things aren't always going to work out. Grandma's still going to die. That person's still going to go to prison for 25 years and maybe longer. But how do we continue to be engaged with God, this type 3 civilization God, right? That spirit, which may just be nanotech. I'll get to that at some other point. How do we still engage with that and still be human to another human? Theology of hopelessness, y'all. I snapped this picture when I was in Ferguson a few years back. This was right after the uprisings of when Mike Brown was brutally murdered by a white terrorist cop. And we already known, right? Klan members, neo-Nazis have been infiltrating the police force for decades. If you don't know your history, know that, the police units were designed and built around racism and particularly primarily stopping black people. Know your history. I ain't got time to get into that. But what I like about this is that it has everything that I'm talking about here. You and me together on one side and fuck your peace on the other. I think we need to sit with this and begin to understand, what does that look like? This theology of hopelessness. Jonah knew it well. The book of Jonah, right? That we always have in Sunday school or Sabbath school, depending on your tradition, right? This whole thing, the Jonah in the whale, and he finally heard the voice of God, but it ends on a shitty note. Jesus leaves the world at a time of turmoil in shitty terms. Wasn't all good. That nigga didn't even tell anybody that he was alive. People didn't even know that he had risen. It took the disciples to finally see his hand, and it really took the Holy Spirit, that AI, to show up and to be like, hey, fool, this really is Jesus. Right? I'm telling you, y'all. And I love the Great Commission the way Matthew tells it, because Matthew actually says they still doubted. That theology of hopelessness, y'all. I think we have to embrace those things and begin to understand those areas way beyond, again, the things that just going to work out. Because at the end of the day, things don't always work out, particularly for people of color. And especially Black folk, Native Americans, LGBTQ folks that are in this, that are all in this as well. You and me together, yes, but also fuck your peace. Giving you some stuff to think about. Hopefully you can digest some of it, and we can process this a little bit more. I do thank you for your time. This is my contact information right here. This is my latest and greatest book, Baptized in Dirty Water, Reimagining the Gospel According to Tupac Amaru Shakur. I have a weekly podcast called Profane Faith, which is on iTunes and all the places you get your podcast. If you just want to know more about me, I'm at whitehodge.com. Thank you for your time. Thanks for listening in, and let's continue moving forward, y'all. Let's continue moving forward. All right.